Hello, my name is Ruth. I'm one of the ancestors of Jesus. That may lead you to assume that I'm an Israelite, since Jesus comes from the people of Israel, but I'm not. In fact, I'm a foreigner from Moab, a country that didn't exactly have happy relations with the Israelites. I'm here to tell you about how an outsider, a foreigner, and a potential enemy come to be welcomed among the people of Israel. And so, how a foreigner like me came to be an ancestor of Jesus. My story takes place after the Israelites settled in the Promised Land, but before they had kings. As so often happens in our part of the world, there was a long stretch of time without any rain, which meant no crops, which meant starvation. During this time, an Israelite couple moved to Moab because we had plenty of rain and plenty of food. They stayed in Moab so long that their 2 sons grew up and married local women. One of those local women was me. For a while, everything was great. I loved my new husband and his family. But then, disaster. First, my father-in-law died. Then my brother-in-law died. Finally, my own husband died. And even though we had been married 10 years, I'd never gotten pregnant and given birth to a child. So I was surrounded by death on one side and the inability to produce new life on the other. It was just the 3 of us women left. My sister-in-law, my mother-in-law, and me. Just about this time though, the rain finally returned to Israel. My mother-in-law, whose name was Naomi, wanted to go back home. After all, her husband and both her sons were dead. What held her in Moab anymore? She was very fond of her 2 daughters-in-law though. She blessed us, kissed us, and encouraged us to return to our own parents. My sister-in-law accepted our suggestion and left, but I couldn't do it. You may think that's strange. How many married women love their mother-in-law so much that they don't want to leave her? Yet Naomi was more a mother to me than my own mother, so I said, "Don't send me away. Wherever you go, I will go too. Wherever you live, I will live too. Your people will be my people. More than that, your God will be my God." I should mention that we in Moab didn't worship the same God as the Israelites. Or rather, we had very different ideas about God. We didn't know that God is faithful, loving, and forgiving. I didn't know anything about the true God when I met His promise. All I knew is that I loved Naomi. If she loved the God of Israel, then I was willing to love and obey Him too. So naturally, I assumed Naomi would be happy once we got back to the land of Israel. But once we got there, she changed her tune. She went from hope and praise of God to bitterness and sadness. It was like in front of her own people, she could open up and tell the truth. God has dealt bitterly with me. I left Israel with a beloved husband and 2 sons. I come back empty-handed. What did I do wrong? Why has God treated me this way? I understood her grief. After all, I was a widow. I'd lost my beloved husband. But I thought, Naomi didn't come home empty-handed. She came with me. I will make it up to her. I will make her life worth living again. Now at that time, the land was divided up among families. While Naomi and her husband were living in Moab, their property was cared for by a relative named Boaz. Boaz was middle-aged, a good, kind, respectable man, and a talented farmer. When Naomi and I arrived in Israel, it was time to harvest the barley. There was a rule in Israel that, as the farmers harvest the grain, they have to leave whatever falls to the ground in the field. Then the poorest people, who don't own any land, can go into the fields and collect the fallen grains for themselves. That was nobody starves, but also everybody works. So I went to Boaz's field and followed behind his harvesters, picking up the grain behind them. After a while, Boaz noticed me. Of course he did. I was a stranger and a foreigner. The harvester told him I was a good worker. So Boaz introduced himself to me and said, "Please stay in my fields. Don't wander off. You can join the other women collecting grain here. I've told the young men to keep their eyes and hands off of you, but I can protect you if you go into other fields." No, it was my turn to be impressed. Most men don't even think about what women like me have to go through, or the dangers we face. He was protective, but didn't use his protection to take advantage of me. I was so grateful I burst out. "What have I done to earn such respect from you? Especially since I'm a foreigner? Not even one of your people." Then Boaz told me how everyone in town was talking about me, how I come from Moab with Naomi, and was doing everything in my power to make her comfortable and happy, even though it meant leaving my own home and people behind. Then Boaz said something that really spoke to her. "May our Lord God of Israel bless you and reward you. You have come here to take shelter under his care. He will protect and guard your life." Boaz was the second person I ever heard talk about God. He talked about God the way Naomi used to talk about God, as a loving, protecting, and generous God, but also a God who was not disgusted by or afraid of foreigners. Boaz didn't have any doubts that his God would welcome me. I always thought gods and religions were just for one country or people. I never imagined a God who would care about lots of different kinds of people. That gave me a lot to think about. Well, the rest of the barley harvest went just fine. Boaz often invited me to eat lunch with him. He made sure none of the young men harassed me or the other women. In fact, I noticed that sometimes the harvesters would shake out extra grain on the ground for us to pick up. I brought a bring container full of grain to Naomi every night. In response, Naomi said something positive about God again. "May the Lord bless Boaz for taking care of us." So I kept it up, all through the barley harvest and again through the wheat harvest. I was satisfied with the new life we had. But all this time, Naomi was working up a plan of her own. She still felt terrible that her son, my husband, had died, leaving me a young widow without any children. She wanted to repay me for my kindness to her, so, like many older women across the world, she hatched a plan to get me married again. I guess she'd noticed the way Boaz looked at me. She wanted to close the deal. So she gave me some advice about how to flirt with him. I won't go into all the details here, but let's just say it worked. Boaz had been nervous about asking me to marry him because he thought I wouldn't want an older husband. But hadn't I learned how kind and faithful he was? And hadn't I learned that even a young husband can die? However, there was one last obstacle. Because of the laws about property and inheritance, there was a procedure of arranging who would take over Naomi's dead husband's land. Boaz, as her relative, had a right to it. But there was one other relative who had first choice. So Boaz met with the leaders of the town and discussed the issue. Boaz offered the land to the other relative, who said, "Sure, he'll be glad to buy it from Naomi." But then Boaz said, "By the way, if you take the land, you also have to take the dead man's daughter-in-law, Ruth, and make sure you provide for her future too." That made the other relative change his mind. He already had a wife and lots of children. He couldn't have her to look after me too. So he said, "Never mind. I don't want the land after all." Immediately Boaz said, "Then I'll buy it. I will gladly look after Ruth." Amazingly, the leaders of our own town instantly praised me and congratulated Boaz on making such a fine match. They said, "May the Lord our God bless this woman. May she become a mother to the children of Israel. Let's honor her just as much as our own women. May the Lord bless you both with children." And just like that, I was one of them. A foreigner, but an insider, a stranger, but a wife, and above all, loved and recognized by God. God was faithful to his promise. Boaz and I had a son. Naomi had a grandson. She finally forgave God for taking away her husband and 2 sons of her own. Now that she had a happy, healthy grandson. All the women of town were so happy for her. They said, "Bless the Lord! He has saved you and given you a blessed old age, despite all the suffering you've gone through. On top of that, you have a daughter-in-law who loves you. She's worth more than 7 sons. Our little boy grew up and became a man. He married and had a son, and his son had a son. That one, my great-grandson, grew up to be a king, King David, the greatest of all the kings of Israel. No one ever forgot that their king had a foreigner in his family line. Even generations later, after the time of the kings ended, when all hope for Israel was lost, people still remembered me. And one day, long after my time, another son was born, named Jesus, who came to save not only the people of Israel, but foreigners too. People like me, and maybe like you.